All right. Uh, Today I have a little extra time, so I'm going to be doing a little bit of my suspect whittling and a lecture rant that I can practice for this year. Now, last one I left off with um, was a lot about barbarians, a lot about the barbarian tribes and their relationship with Rome. I'm actually going to talk about the Roman government a little bit this week, just for the sake of it. Also, I've made the shape of a guy. I'm going to try and draw his features and face, and we'll see how it goes. So, there is this perception among people who study the Roman Empire, or don't study it a ton, but kind of know something about it, that Rome basically went into decline. Again, it's this rise and fall narrative that's pretty old, but is probably most easily popularized with Edward Gibbon's decline and fall of the Roman Empire, which is really based around this idea of decadence, that the Roman Empire became kind of decadent. It couldn't be what it needed to be anymore. There's that perception. Now, there is instability at the center and an inability to govern throughout the top. That is true. That does happen, and we'll get to that. But I'd argue that has less to do with individual competency and more to do with system collapse and why the system's collapsed. Now, to start off, by the beginning of the 5th century, Rome has been divided into two different empires. There's an Eastern and Western Empire. The Eastern Empire is centered around Constantinople, which founded as a formal city by Constantine himself, who Constantine is the emperor who makes Christianity or legalizes and then converts when he's on his deathbed. Now, the center, Rome is no longer the capital. It is now Ravenna. But Rome is still seen as the spiritual capital of the Western Empire. And of these two, the Eastern Empire is far, 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 far more wealthy. These regions were wealthy before the collapse of the Roman Empire and would continue to be so for the whole time. Now, Constantinople, in addition, is probably one of the wealthiest and largest cities in the world. Really only rivaled by Chinese cities that I know of at this point, though I certainly could be wrong. There might be some Indian cities or South Asian cities or Mesoamerican cities that rival it. But they're divided between the two. These are generally called the barracks emperors. They're emperors who come from either ruling families or military families or things like that. They're often from the Danube or Iberia or places like that. But, pointedly, they're not barbarians. Barbarians gain a ton of Roman power within the Roman Empire, but they never really take the throne themselves till the very, very end. And even then, not as emperors. But, moving on. So, let's go back to Valens dying in 378. Valens dies in 378. Gratian, who is of another family, was coming from the west. He took his time. There are those accusing him of dilly-dallying. There's also those accusing Valens of rushing with the intention of not wanting to give Gratian any credit. In the aftermath, an emperor called Theodosius takes over. Theodosius is Iberian. He is probably the last emperor. He is certainly the last emperor who rules both sides of the empire in his own capacity. He is also probably one of the last emperors who's able to really rule with something like autocratic authority. He stabilizes the Eastern Empire. He releases what are called the Theodosian Codes, and his family is who's in charge in both sides of the empire when he goes. He dies, I want to say, in 396. Yes, I'm right, 396. After that, the empire is always, at least administratively, divided between the two. Now, a little about these families. There's Honorius, who, according to all accounts, seems to have really been a pretty lame duck emperor. He's in the west. He's the one who presides over the fall of the city of Rome to Alaric. He seems to be the guy who sees that happen in Ravenna. Then there is, in the east, there is Arcadius. Now, these guys, you actually don't need to know their names that much. They are not particularly politically relevant. What is relevant is someone named Stilicho. Stilicho is the first of these people who are kind of like kingmakers. Now, he's probably one of the better faith ones compared to some of the later ones who will be much more in it for their own business. But Stilicho is what is called a kingmaker. He basically is a military general who presides over the Roman royal family or imperial family. He presides over them, helps them. He marries his daughter to Honorius. It is a whole thing. His opponents would accuse him of trying to work his way into the royal family, which is probably accurate. He probably was trying to do that. But let's get back to a little of Stilicho's background. Stilicho, or Stilicho, is probably the correct way to say it, Stilicho. We're still speaking Latin. His mother was a Roman noblewoman. His father was a Vandal, a Germanic tribesman, ethnically somewhat related to Goths, from what we can tell. We'll get more to the Vandals later. They are not a particularly pleasant group by any standards. But from what we can tell, his father, he doesn't have a lot of a relationship with his father. Unclear why. There's been a lot of reasons put forward, but Stilicho, while he had a barbarian father, clearly viewed himself as a Roman. He saw himself as a Roman. He never allied with barbarians against Rome, and in fact defeated Alaric at Pavia before Alaric took Rome in 410. They worked together a lot, or worked against each other, but he knew all these guys because they served in the Roman military. Alaric served for most of his life in the Roman military. Again, that's the king of the Goths. He serves in the Roman military for a long time, so he has this relationship with Stilicho. Then, 408, Stilicho, this first kingmaker, this first kind of power behind the throne, is kicked out by his political rivals, courtiers at court, and he is executed. He is killed and beheaded. And this causes a huge stir and is one of the many reasons that Alaric rebels. Now, eventually this stabilizes, and this family does continue limping along for a little while, largely due to the machinations of Galla Placida, who is the sister, I believe, of Honorius, and all these families. But again and again, we're seeing these issues where the families have trouble managing the identities. The empire really, we get these very salacious stories of these guys who are kind of nuts and they're kind of decadent and all this, but really they just stopped mattering as much. There had been a decentralization for a while now. This had been happening probably arguably since Marcus Aurelius. And we're already seeing signs that things like the standardized Roman education and things like that, they're going by the wayside. Literacy and graffiti are becoming less common. We're seeing less and less of it. We're seeing less and less people thinking of themselves or worrying about what the empire thinks. In places like Iberia, in places like Britain, in places like Gaul. These places are being more and more poorly administrated by the emperor. To the point where when some barbarian tribes go into Spain, the Visigoths are hired to go get them and eventually just kind of set up a kingdom in there, and one that will last until the Muslim conquest. Now, this era is an era of rises and falls. It keeps happening. These emperors don't stay in power for long, much after this family. Much after this family, emperors never stay in power that long. They're either thrown down by their guards or a courtier or whatever. Now, that brings us to the man who would probably rival Attila. We're going to fast forward a little bit to Attila, and this will be kind of where I'm ending at. It's the shorter one today. Attila had been raiding again and again. He was actually a hostage in Rome, just to refresh your memories. One person he interacted with a lot was a man named Aetius. Aetius was a Pannonian. He was from what is now Hungary, which is still a Roman province in the east. But he fully was a Roman. He was a provincial Roman, but you would no more not view yourself as a Roman as anything else. He was one of these kingmakers, probably the last really successful Roman kingmaker. Romanized general. So he initially kind of shadows Attila until there's a raid on something called the Catalonian Fields. Now, the Catalonian Fields was a battle in now Chalon in France, Catalonia in Gaul, where the two armies were meeting. Now, Rome at this point does not have a very large army. Military is not even structured to gather in one place the way it used to. It's kind of a little different. But they also have to get the help of the barbarians. And these barbarians, they can't just order. They have to convince. Aetius uses his relationship with the Goths to get the Goths to help out under King Theodoric. There will be more Theodorics later if we stay doing this. And he also had to ask Alans to help. Alans are an Iranian group who were pushed west by the Huns. And he has what are called Amoricans, which seem to be Brittonic people, Celtic speakers in what is now Brittany and probably southwestern Britain as well. I'm going to do an episode probably next week on the fall of Rome and Britain, but we're not there yet. So they have this battle. It's a 2-day battle, and usually it is cited as a defeat for Attila. It seems to be more like a stalemate, which, to be fair, as a raiding army, is as much as a defeat as anything else. That really is a defeat to these type of armies. He is thrown back, and he raids into the south, going deeper and deeper. Attila, he drives deeper and deeper. At this point, the emperors are barely even there. They're not even really something that's involved in this policy. I honestly cannot even remember the emperor who's in charge right now. It might be Arcadius. I might be wrong, though. But at this point, there is a conversation between him and the Bishop of Rome, Leo, who will become Saint Leo. And we don't know what happens in this conversation, but he convinces Attila to turn around. And it ends the raid, the attack on Italy. And with that, Attila sort of recedes back to his empire and will die of all sorts of different accusations. On one of his wedding nights, he had multiple wives, as many steppe tribes did. My money's on alcohol poisoning. That's kind of where I fall on it. He seems to have alcohol poisoning, just based on how they write him, but it's unclear. Now, his empire will disintegrate very quickly. We'll get to that another day. Now, the thing I want to end on is what happens with Aetius and how this causes the rise and fall. Aetius is dealing with these courtiers. The Roman imperial court is, if there's a fair claim to decadence, it's the Roman imperial court. It has become this very showy, kind of flowery place where there's intrigues, all these things. That very capital O Orientalist idea that often is written about the Ottomans or Muslim courts in a way that's really unfair. It honestly fits better to the Byzantine and Western Roman Empire courts of the 5th century and 6th century. It actually fits them better than it does any sort of Central Asian or West Asian culture. But I digress. They, again, do something similar to what happens to Stilicho. This is now several decades later. This is now, we are in the 450s. And convince the emperor, whose name escapes me. I believe it might be Arcadius, but if it's not, forgive me. To have Aetius assassinated. And he has Aetius assassinated. But no sooner does he have Aetius assassinated that within a couple months, some of Aetius's disgruntled soldiers have him killed. And this is the time where emperors are often thrown out. I'm going to very quickly run through what happens to the emperors. There are other things I will talk about. The emperors, honestly, after this point, don't matter that much. Now, we have a few others. Rome is disintegrating, being chopped away by the Vandals in Africa, Goths in the west, Huns to the north, all these things. Bit by bit, the administration is disintegrating, and these emperors are ruling for months rather than years. We have Marjorian, who tries his best to get back the Roman Empire, or at least stabilize it. He is unsuccessful and later assassinated. There are other people dethroned again and again. One guy, Julius Nepos, tries to revitalize the thing. It does not work, and he is thrown out into Illyria, what is now Albania, and will stay there for a decade after the fall of the Western Empire. Until finally, after dozens of forgettable emperors, Anthemius, all these ones that I honestly can't even keep track of, we get to the last one. He is an 11-year-old boy. His name is Romulus Augustulus. He is put on the throne by his kingmaker of a father, a man whose name we know as Orestes, who fought with Attila. He is on the throne for, I believe, 10 months before a barbarian named Odoacer, who is a Sciadi or half Hun, whatever. It's hard to say. Before he basically comes in, overthrows the emperor, and returns the Western imperial regalia to the Eastern Empire, which has survived and will stabilize a little bit in the next century. He says, I am now king of Italy in your stead. There will be no more Western empires. He has Orestes, the lieutenant of Attila, killed, but he does not kill the little boy Romulus Augustulus, deciding, you know what, the kid didn't have anything to do with this. The kid barely knew what was going on. Puts him in a rich estate in central Italy that we are fairly confident this young man survives well into his 50s and maybe even 60s, just in comfortable retirement in central Italy. Now, I've gone through the political history of the fall of the ancient Rome in a very blasting quick detail. Next week, I'm going to talk about Britain. Then I will talk about Gaul. Then I will talk about the early Middle Ages, my bread and butter. This has been a lot of fun. My guy's face looks haunted. But thank you all to all those who listen.